Welcome to the second of our training sessions for our Saving Nidderdale's Priority Ponds project. Today we are going to be focusing on clean water testing. But first of all, a little bit of background about the Freshwater Habitats Trust. We started life as Pond Action back in the late 1980s, an organisation that subsequently became Pond Conservation, with Jeremy Biggs and Penny Williams at the helm. In 2013, we relaunched the charity as a Freshwater Habitats Trust to spearhead the fight against biodiversity loss in all of Britain's freshwaters. So not just for ponds, but for all small water bodies, including streams, rivers and ditches. The Trust places particular emphasis on creating areas of clean water, something that has now almost vanished from large parts of the landscape and which is vital for our wildlife. So the Freshwater Habitats Trust has joined forces with Nidderdale AONAB to undertake a new project to save priority ponds from being degraded and lost across the area. Thanks to generous funding through Yorkshire Water's Biodiversity Programme, Saving Nidderdale's Priority Ponds builds on the success of Nidderdale's AONB's previous project, the Wild Watch, which ran from 2017 to 2019 and which discovered over 1,400 ponds across the AONB, including previously unknown high-status priority ponds. Nidderdale AONB is an area of 233 square miles located on the eastern flanks of the Yorkshire Pennines, stretching from the high moorland of Great Whernside south and east towards the edge of the Vale of York. AONABs are designated in recognition of their nationally important landscapes to ensure their character and qualities are protected for all to enjoy. AONBs have the same level of protection as national parks. So today we will be focusing on the use of our rapid water quality test kits. But first, I'd like to tell you a bit more about clean water testing and why it is so important. So what is clean water? Well, clean water is water without added pollution. Pollution includes nutrients like phosphate and nitrate, but also a cocktail of various things such as road runoff, oils, sediments and pesticides. We define clean water as that which has a chemistry and biology which would be normal for a given area in the absence of human disturbance. This is commonly referred to as a reference condition, minimally impaired, water quality or natural background levels. Most freshwater plants and animals have evolved over millions of years in a world where the natural level of nutrients in ponds, lakes, streams and rivers was very, very low. When more nutrients are added to the freshwater environment, this can cause profound changes and the freshwater wildlife struggle to adapt. Rare and sensitive species are lost first. If nutrient levels continue to rise, only very nutrient-tolerant aggressive species will survive. So nutrients such as phosphate and nitrate act like fertiliser and increase the productivity of water bodies, including the growth of algae and plankton, which block light and use up oxygen. So larger organisms struggle to survive. For wildlife, clean water is key. If we want to see ecologically rich, self-sustaining freshwater habitats, then we need clean water habitats. So just how bad is it? Well, our research over the last 30 years has revealed that in lowland England and Wales, there are no longer any undamaged rivers left. 87% of headwater streams are biologically degraded east of a line from the Humber to the Dorset coast, and 92% of ponds are biologically degraded. Plant richness has declined by 20% in the last decade. Also, there is just a single lake in England and Wales classified as undamaged, Burnmore Tarn. So why is water quality so poor? Well, in the UK, a large part of the threat to fresh waters is due to pollution, especially from intensive agriculture, runoff from urban areas and roads, and sewerage. The single largest source of nitrate pollution comes from fertiliser, which is used to improve crop growth. And the main source of phosphate pollution comes from detergents and sewerage. Most of England's rivers and lakes are highly polluted. Too many nutrients, heavy metals, pathogens, pesticides and sediment. So water bodies which drain large catchments, by their very nature, will pick up these pollutants. And extinction rates for freshwater species are 4 to 6 times higher than terrestrial and marine rates. In this photograph, the English countryside on the Oxford-Wiltshire border looks idyllic, but virtually all fresh water in this landscape are seriously polluted. So the Water Framework Directive is a piece of European environmental legislation which aims to improve and protect the water environment on a catchment scale. The main aims of WFD are to prevent deterioration and enhance the status of aquatic ecosystems, to promote sustainable water use, reduce pollution, and to contribute to the mitigation of floods and droughts. Under the Water Framework Directive, running water, river habitats and some lakes are assessed using biological, chemical and morphological metrics. In a one-out, all-out system, all elements have to achieve a minimum standard of good status. Below this minimum standard, ecosystems will become biologically degraded. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, high status is a reference condition, minimally impaired water quality, free from human disturbance and modification. And the difference between good and high can mean a loss of 50% of the species. So for us, good is not really good enough. As we can see on this map, there are very few good or high standard water bodies. So you need to be looking for the blue lines, mainly found in upland areas of Cumbria and Wales. The majority of the monitored rivers, orange and yellow on the map, fall into the moderate or poor category. It's also important to note that this data was only collected from a small proportion of the freshwater environment. So 99% of freshwater habitats, including ponds and small waters, fall outside of the statutory monitored network. As part of the WFD, there is no data from an estimated 480,000 ponds. That is a lot of water to ignore. So what about ponds? Well, 2/3 of all freshwater plants and animals can be found somewhere in ponds. Ponds sport around 100 priority species under the English BAP, now the S41/42. The UK Biodiversity Action Plan was published in 1994 and was the UK government's response to the Convention on Biological Diversity, which the UK signed up to in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. The UK BAP described the biological resources of the UK and provided detailed plans for conservation of these resources. This was superseded in England by Section 41 of the 2006 Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act, NERC. 1 in 5 ponds in semi-natural landscapes also support at least one red data book species. Now, red lists are a globally recognised way of identifying the threat of extinction to species using the internationally accepted red list guidelines developed by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN. So we know that ponds are threatened. In Great Britain, 1/3 of ponds existing 100 years ago have gone. The current estimate is around 480,000 ponds. There are, however, probably millions more seasonal ponds that have never been recorded that have now disappeared. Better news is data from the Countryside Survey, which took place in 2007, suggests the number of ponds is now increasing. However, the real problem is pond quality. Nationally, over 80% of ponds are in poor or very poor condition, and only 10% remain in an undegraded state. Unlike pond numbers, the pond quality situation is getting worse. The number of very poor ponds increased by 20% between 1996 and 2007. So why are countryside ponds poor and declining? Well, the same issues as for running waters. Intensive agriculture, particularly arable land, with nutrients and pesticides, high stream inflow volumes, bringing in nutrient-rich sediments, and the presence of road runoff, so nutrients and other pollutants. But it's not all doom and gloom. Let's take a look at some positives. A pioneering study was carried out by Jeremy and Penny, the founders of the Freshwater Habitats Trust, in the early 2000s, to understand the difference between the conservation value of different freshwater habitats. Information about the relative biodiversity value of different water body types is a vital prerequisite for many strategic conservation goals. But in practice, however, exceptionally few inter-water body comparisons have been made. So this study compared river, stream, ditch and pond biodiversity within an 80 square kilometre area of lowland British countryside with intensive farming, centred on the River Cole in Coleshill, Oxfordshire, and surveys of wetland plants and microinvertebrates were taken. As you can see by this graph, at a landscape scale, the ponds in the River Cole catchment were the richest habitat, a result echoed across Europe and perhaps beyond, as we'll see in this next slide. In the River Cole catchment, the total number of plants found in all the ponds added together was around 65. In all the streams, it was only 50. This was a pattern repeated in every other catchment, and the results showed that although all water body types contributed to the diversity of macrophytes and macroinvertebrates in the region, they differed in relative value. The findings as a whole suggest that ponds and other small water bodies can contribute significantly to regional biodiversity, and this contrasts markedly with their relative status in national monitoring and protection strategies, where small water bodies are largely ignored. So what makes ponds special? Well, clean water. Although, as we have seen during the presentation, ponds are threatened by the same issues as running water, their small size and isolation means that they have avoided many of the pollution problems faced by other freshwaters. Many species traditionally associated with rivers find refuge in clean water ponds. And also variety. Ponds come in all shapes and sizes, whereas rivers are often relatively uniform across the whole catchment. The biotic community will be influenced by the underlying geology, water source, surrounding habitat, proximity to other wetlands, and the presence of and intensity of grazing. So overall, ponds collectively will be more diverse than the adjacent river in most wider countryside catchments. So now I'd like to tell you a bit about monitoring freshwater habitats and how getting involved with this project will help us to build up a picture of the clean water areas in the Nidderdale AONB. Firstly, a bit about the Clean Water for Wildlife survey that we carried out as part of our recent People, Ponds and Water project. For this project, we sent out thousands of clean water kits, the same kits that hopefully you'll be using for this project, to volunteers across England and Wales. As you can see on the map, the bad news is there are an awful lot of red dots indicating the extent of nutrient pollution. The good news is, however, that people still found clean, unpolluted water in all the landscapes they tested. The results also revealed for the first time the national importance of ponds in the clean water network. So now I'm going to show you a few slides on some of the other clean water survey projects that we've delivered over the years. The Och is a river that drains into the River Thames in Oxfordshire. It mainly gets its water from areas of typical English countryside, which is used heavily for modern industrial farming. Dotted through the area are small villages and country towns. But even here, there are small areas of woodland, meadow and marshes whose history can be traced back for 5,000 years. These are often protected and managed as wildlife nature reserves. The clean water in the Och catchment is found in 37% of water bodies, and almost all of these were ponds and lakes. Like most areas of lowland Britain, the majority of streams, ditches and all rivers suffer serious nutrient pollution. This is not surprising because the network of rivers drain water from huge areas of land with multiple sources of pollution from urban and agricultural sources. In contrast, some ponds can collect water from locally clean sources, small areas of land which aren't exposed to nutrient pollution. Of course, some ponds are polluted, particularly if they occur in intensively farmed fields or drain water from roads. And some of the tiny streams and ditches can also escape pollution for a time if they start life in woodland or within nature reserves. So no extra nutrients are being added to these places, and so they offer wildlife havens for species that depend on clean water. Another example is the Lower Windrush Valley catchment. Almost 60% of the water bodies sampled in the Lower Windrush Valley showed no evidence of nutrient pollution. A high proportion of ponds and lakes were unpolluted. In contrast, the river sites had high nutrient pollution, as were most of the stream sites. One well was sampled, and this also had high nutrient levels. Our final example is a New Forest in Hampshire. The New Forest is one of the largest and most important areas for wildlife in England. It has lots of good habitats, including heathlands, woodlands and grasslands, and lots of freshwater habitats, so ponds, lakes, rivers, streams and ditches. In the New Forest, you can see ponies, cows, donkeys and pigs grazing as they have done for thousands of years. You won't see big farms, large towns or cities like you find in the rest of England. So clean water in the New Forest catchment is found in just over 3/4 of water bodies, so 76%. Within the New Forest, the water is mostly clean and unpolluted, as the land only has traditional low-intensity grazing, so very few nutrients are being added to the landscape. Any nutrient pollution comes mainly from the towns and villages. The New Forest is one of the few places in southern England where lots of the streams and rivers are still unpolluted. Now, this is fantastic for wildlife, which has a huge choice of habitats to live in or move between. And not surprisingly, the New Forest is home to many of our most rare and threatened freshwater plants and animals. Outside of the New Forest is a very different story. Here, the land is farmed and the number of animals per field increases. This massively increases the amount of pollutants being added to the landscape, and as a result, many sites are highly polluted. Many freshwater plants and animals struggle to survive here, and the freshwater habitats are much poorer in wildlife. So how do these three examples compare? As you can see, the New Forest comes out top for clean, unpolluted water, with the Lower Windrush Valley second, with its many lakes and gravel pits. And the highly agricultural landscape of the Och catchment brings up the rear. So where is the clean water? As we see, the majority of the clean water is made up of still water bodies, ponds and lakes. And interestingly, in the Och and Lower Windrush Valley, the gravel pit lakes. Following on from our survey, which I'm hoping you'll be able to help with, we'll have a similar map of the Nidderdale AONB area to compare with these examples. So finally, I'm now going to show you a few slides about our clean water test kits. For our survey, we have identified a selection of ponds in the Nidderdale AONB area that we'd like volunteers to sample. So on this map, the yellow squares are the volunteer survey squares, and the blue squares are sites that we've already sampled as part of previous projects. On signing up to carry out the survey, we'll issue a pond or cluster of ponds for you to go out and survey. We will send you a site pack with details of the ponds, including a map, grid reference of the pond and any landowner details. And all the information you need to carry out the survey can be found on our website. From our homepage, you can quickly navigate to our dedicated Nidderdale Ponds project page, where you will find information, all the information you need to carry out the survey, including a recording of this presentation. So just click on the link and it will take you to the page. So back to the actual clean water surveys. So nutrient pollution is invisible, so often doesn't seem real to people. These quick kits make it possible for people to easily see pollution for the first time. It also gives us the opportunity to get data from sites which would not otherwise be monitored. So once you have taken your sample, following the instructions on the survey form, and more about this later, you can pick a range category for both nitrate and phosphate by checking the colour in the tube against a colour chart. You do this once the allocated time is up, so 3 minutes for nitrate and 5 minutes for phosphate. There is a handy classification guide to see how polluted your water sample is. If your result falls between the blue section, this indicates that there is no evidence of nitrate or phosphate pollution. The green category, some pollution, and the brown to maroon category, high and very high levels of pollution. So let's take a look at the clean water survey. When Kate sends you your kits, she'll also send you a recording form for each sample kit, so one for each pond. This gives you all the instructions you need to carry out your survey. On one side, there is a rundown of how to take your sample, and then on the other side, there is a recording form. It's important to take this printed form out with you, as you'll need it for the colour change chart. On the recording form, make sure that you enter the full grid reference for the pond and the recording group as NID Ponds. We are carrying out clean water testing projects at different sites across the country, so filling it in the group name ensures that when we come to download the data at the end of the project, we can easily find the Nidderdale Ponds data. We also have a full clean water leaflet with more details on clean water testing, including the classification chart that we mentioned previously. We'll also send you one of these with your clean water kits. Both of the recording form and the leaflet can also be downloaded from our project web page. And in the project resources section on our website, we also have a video which was originally made for our Clean Water for Wildlife project. This takes you through all the stages of taking the sample and recording the results, so it's really good for a refresh. And once you have completed your survey and filled in the recording form, the next step, once you're back home, is to submit the data online via the Data Hub on our project website. Just click the link and enter the results recorded on your survey form. Don't forget to add the recording group as NID Ponds. As I mentioned previously, we do run other clean water survey projects at various sites across the UK, so this will help us identify your results for the Nidderdale area. when we come to download the data at the end of the survey project. So, as I mentioned previously, our rapid water quality test kits make visible pollution that is otherwise invisible and largely unknown. There is an assumption that if water is clear, then it is clean. This is not always the case. So here we have 4 pots containing different water samples, all of which look clean, i.e. they are clear. So looking at the results, as we can see in sample A is showing high levels of nutrient pollution. This is actually tap water. Now, most people are not aware that there are, depending on where you live, high levels of nitrate and phosphate in tap water. Tap water is regulated so that levels are not harmful to human health, but these levels of NMP in the wetland environment is harmful to aquatic life. As previously noted, when more nutrients are added to the freshwater environment, this can cause profound changes, and freshwater wildlife can struggle to adapt. So what about sample B? This is indicating very clean water. This is in fact bottled drinking water and represents the ideal clean water conditions in which aquatic life thrive. So moving on, as you can see, sample C also shows high levels of nitrate. This was actually taken from the Yorkshire Ouse, so it's river water. And sample D, like sample B on the previous slide, is indicative of very clean water. This is rainwater taken from a rainwater boat. So that's it for the presentation. Do get in touch. If you have any photographs you want to send of any of your sites, please do send them across to our Priority Ponds Project Officer Kate. And you can find her on social media at Kate W Freshwater, and myself, sort of, and Carter. And down at the bottom we have our web page. So all the information you need, you can either contact Kate or have a look on our website. So thank you for listening.